Imagine this: a tale of kidnapping, a wife imprisoned, a trail of failed marriages, and children left behind. Picture dramatic showdowns and a twilight spent in seclusion, weaving a legacy laced with secrets and riddles unanswered. What if this wasn't just fiction, but the life of a man revered by some and reviled by others? Welcome to the Sins of Scientology. My name is Sandy McKenna, and along with Abraham Ulrich, in this episode, we'll dive deep into the life of L. Ron Hubbard, the man behind the mystery. His life story reads like one of the most complex of novels, blending ambitions, controversy, and mystery into a legacy that continues to captivate and divide the world. We journey through L. Ron Hubbard's intricate and confusing life, from his early days as a charismatic science fiction writer to the founding of Scientology. This movement promised enlightenment, but it has been mired in scandal. We'll uncover the layers behind Hubbard's public persona, exploring the tales of adventure, the claims of grandeur, and the controversies that trailed him like shadows. But the intrigue doesn't end with his life. His final days were shrouded in secrecy, leading to rampant speculation and conspiracy theories that persist to this day. Was his death the simple passing of a man, or the final act in a play of a master storyteller? What truths lie buried, and what legacy has he left behind for the followers and critics of Scientology? Buckle up, listeners, as we embark on this journey into the heart of a mystery, examining the life and death of L. Ron Hubbard.
Lafayette Ronald Hubbard was born in Tilden, Nebraska on March 13, 1911. His father, Harry Ross Hubbard, was a naval officer, which meant that the Hubbard family moved frequently. This nomadic lifestyle exposed Hubbard to a diverse range of cultures and experiences from a young age, significantly shaping his vivid imagination and early interest in adventure, storytelling, and the occult. Hubbard's early fascination with the occult can be mainly attributed to his friendship with Commander Joseph C. Thomson, a former student of Sigmund Freud and a fellow of the Explorers Club, whom Hubbard met during his teenage years. Thomas introduced Hubbard to the world of Freudian ideas and the occult, further fueling his interest in the mind and spirit. Hubbard's adventurous spirit was evident in his early travels. At the age of 19, he traveled to Asia, visiting places like China, Japan, the Philippines, and Guam. These travels were crucial in developing his worldview. Hubbard later claimed that these experiences exposed him to Eastern philosophies and cultures which he said influenced his later work. However, there's much debate about the extent of these influences on his work, with some arguing that Hubbard's account of his travels was exaggerated or embellished to enhance his mystique. One of the most well-known embellished tales from Hubbard's early life is his claim of becoming a blood brother to the Blackfeet tribe at the age of 6. This claim has been widely disputed and is considered by many to be a fabrication. The Blackfeet Nation has no record of this ceremony ever taking place, and experts of Blackfeet traditions have stated that the tribe has no custom of making non-Indian blood brothers. This story is one of the many instances where critics view Hubbard's account of his early life and achievements with skepticism. These aspects of Hubbard's early life, his interest in the occult, his travels, and his penchant for storytelling significantly shape his later work and the development of Dianetics and Scientology. His life story, as told by him, is filled with adventure, exploration, and spiritual questing. But it's essential to approach these accounts critically, given the discrepancies and fabrications that have been documented.
L. Ron Hubbard's military service during World War II is a subject of considerable controversy and debate, with significant discrepancies between Hubbard's accounts of heroism and valor and the official military records. Hubbard claimed extensive wartime service, including being severely wounded in combat, commanding a submarine chaser, and conducting covert operations. He often spoke of being blinded and disabled in the line of duty, only to heal himself using techniques that would later form the basis of Dianetics. These stories contributed to his mystique and were used to establish his authority and efficacy in his discoveries. However, official military records and investigative reports tell a remarkably different story. Hubbard did serve in the Navy during World War II, but his service was less distinguished than he claimed. Records indicate that he was never injured in combat. Instead, his only recorded injuries were acute conjunctivitis and hemorrhoids. Hubbard did serve as a commander of a subchaser, the USS PC-815. The chasers were small, roughly about 110 feet long and 85 tons in displacement. Commanding and manning these vessels were undergraduates from Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and other American universities who would join the Naval Reserve. These officers did not have seagoing experience, but took these craft to service overseas. Hubbard's tenure was marked by incidents including an unauthorized bombardment of the Mexican Coronado Islands, which led to reprimand. Note, there are no official records supporting Hubbard's claim of being a war hero. The much-touted incidents of heroism and being severely wounded in battle do not appear in his service record. These discrepancies have significantly impacted Hubbard's credibility, particularly amongst critics of Scientology. Skeptics argue that Hubbard's fabricated and exaggerated details of his military service cast doubt on the reliability of the founder of Dianetics and Scientology for a system that claims scientific precision is understanding the human mind. Its founder's credibility and trustworthiness became crucial factors in evaluating the legitimacy of the entire enterprise. The Church of Scientology defended Hubbard's military record, suggesting that his records were either not fully disclosed or that his most secret missions were classified. These claims are unsubstantiated, with evidence that satisfies historians or critics. The controversy over Hubbard's military service is emblematic of the broader debate surrounding his life in the Church of Scientology. For supporters, Hubbard's narrative of his military service underscores his resilience and the transformative power of his discoveries. For critics, the discrepancies between his accounts and official records are a fundamental challenge to his authority and the authenticity of his teachings. The examination of L. Ron Hubbard's military service underscores the complex interplay between myth-making and reality in the foundation of Scientology. Understanding the discrepancies is vital to comprehending the controversies that surround Hubbard's legacy and the religion he founded.
L. Ron Hubbard transitioned into adulthood with a prolific career as a writer, particularly within the science fiction genre. His storytelling and imaginative abilities were evident from an early age, and by the 1930s, he'd become a well-known figure in the pulp fiction world. He wrote for various genres, but science fiction and fantasy stories garnered him the most attention and acclaim. As a writer for Pulp magazine in the 1930s and 40s, he was known for his ability to produce vast quantities of work in a short period, a skill driven by the necessity of earning a living in a competitive pulp fiction market. He was reportedly able to write between 20 and 100,000 words a month, and his stories were featured in magazines such as Astounding Science Fiction, Unknown, and the Thrilling Wonder Stories. Pulp magazines, popular from the late 19th through the mid-20th century, were inexpensive fiction magazines known for their fast-paced, plot-driven stories. These magazines prioritized action and adventure over literary style. They got their name from the low-quality wood pulp paper on which they were printed. Unlike the more expensive, sleek magazines that used higher quality pulp paper, pulp magazines were affordable, mass-produced publications that catered to a broad audience with their sensational, colorful cover art in a variety of genres. During the 1930s and 40s, pulp magazines experienced a golden age of a wealth of genres, including science fiction, fantasy, adventure, crime, horror, and romance. These publications were instrumental in developing and popularizing genre fiction, particularly science fiction and fantasy. They offered a platform for new writers to reach a large readership and for established writers to experiment with new ideas and pseudonyms. L. Ron Hubbard's publications of Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health, was a watershed moment in the evolution of Dianetics into Scientology. Published in 1950, Dianetics quickly became a bestseller. Initially presented as a self-help methodology and psychological theory, The book introduced the concept of the reactive mind and proposed a methodology for erasing traumatic memories to achieve a state of clear. This promise of mental wellness quickly captured the public's imagination. Dianetics laid out a framework for understanding and improving mental health through a process called auditing, in which an individual will work with an auditor to uncover and address the subconscious sources of psychological distress, referred to as engrams. Hubbard claimed that through Dianetics, individuals could achieve a state of clear, freeing themselves from the negative impacts of the past traumas and enabling significant improvement in intelligence and overall well-being. The book's release tapped into the post-war context where there was a hunger for new approaches to mental health, individual fulfillment, and self-improvement. The zeitgeist, combined with Hubbard's compelling narrative and the promise of a practical method for achieving unprecedented personal transformation, led to Dianetics becoming a bestseller. Dianetics clubs sprang up across the United States, and the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation was established to further the study and application of Hubbard's method. Various sources, including Freudian psychoanalysis, Eastern religion, and a burgeoning field of self-help literature, influenced the principles and practices outlined in Dianetics. However, Hubbard's background as a storyteller was evident in how Dianetics was presented, with compelling narratives about the potential for human betterment and freedom from the shackles of the past. Hubbard's opposition to psychiatry and mainstream medicine is well documented and fundamental to the beliefs and practices of Scientology. In his book Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health, Hubbard introduced the concept of auditing as an alternative to psychiatric practices, which he claimed could cure a wide range of physical and mental illnesses without medication or traditional medical intervention. Scientology's literature and Hubbard's writing describe psychiatry as an abusive and fraudulent practice, portraying psychiatrists as enemies of humanity responsible for various societal ills. Hubbard's critique of psychiatry extended to mainstream medicine, particularly the use of drugs for mental health treatment. Scientology's stance is that many physical ailments are psychosomatic, rooted in the mind rather than the body, and can be addressed through spiritual healing practices like auditing. This viewpoint has led to controversies and criticism, particularly regarding the Church's handling of medical issues among its members. As Dianetics evolved into Scientology, Hubbard's skill as a storyteller remained central to the movement's appeal. He crafted an elaborate cosmology and a set of practices that promised mental health and spiritual enlightenment. His writings, lectures, and organizational structure of Scientology reflects his ability to create and sustain a narrative that attracted followers and built a new religious movement. Hubbard's journey from a struggling writer to the founder of a new religious movement illustrates how his imaginative abilities and storytelling skills were not just facets of his personality, but instrumental in creating and disseminating Dianetics and Scientology. Despite its popularity, Dianetics faced criticism from the medical and scientific communities, financial difficulties, and internal disputes. In response to these challenges and limitations inherent in Dianetics' focus on mental health, Hubbard expanded his framework to include the spiritual dimension of human experience.
By 1952, this expansion had culminated into the creation of Scientology, the religious movement that incorporated Dianetics principles within the broader cosmological and spiritual system. Scientology introduced the concept of the Thetan, an immortal spiritual being who is the true essence of an individual transcending the physical body and mind. This shift marked a departure from Dianetics' purely psychological focus, aiming instead at the spiritual rehabilitation of individuals. Scientology offered a path toward spiritual enlightenment and freedom through auditing and training courses structured across a series of ascending levels, each promising more significant insights and spiritual capabilities. The establishment of Scientology came with the development of a complex organizational structure, including the Church of Scientology as the central institution overseeing the practice and dissemination of Scientology worldwide. The structure allowed for the standardization of practices, centralized authority, and creating a cohesive community of practitioners committed to Hubbard's vision. In the post-war era, Scientology's appeal lay in its promise to address the existential uncertainties and spiritual malaise that affected many. Hubbard's vision offered a clear, authoritative path to understanding and transcending the human condition. Scientology's teaching on the external nature of the Thetan and the possibility of achieving higher states of existence resonated with individuals seeking purpose and direction in a rapidly changing world. The transition from Dianetics to Scientology represents a significant evolution in Hubbard's thought and the movement he founded. Moving beyond the bounds of mental health to embrace a comprehensive spiritual philosophy, Scientology positioned itself as a unique answer to the questions of the modern age. Its promise of mental clarity, spiritual advancement, and a highly structured path towards enlightenment drew individuals into its fold, making a significant religious movement in the post-war era. Despite his writing success, Hubbard's financial situation was often precarious, and he struggled with finances throughout his life. The economic instability was exacerbated by his first two marriages, which ended in divorce and the responsibilities of a growing family. His financial and personal struggles played a significant role in the development of Dianetics and Scientology, as Hubbard sought to establish a more stable and lucrative career.
The Sea Organization, or Sea Org as it's best known, was established by Hubbard in 1967 as a dedicated group of Scientology's most committed members. Initially based on a fleet of ships commanded by Hubbard, the Sea Org serves as the church's operational and administrative core, with members committing to a billion-year contract to symbolize their eternal dedication to Scientology's mission. The Sea Org plays a crucial role in enforcing Hubbard's vision, overseeing the delivery of the upper-level Scientology courses and managing the organization's most critical operations. The Sea Org is known for a strict discipline and commitment to Hubbard's directives, embodying his ideals of loyalty and dedication to Scientology's cause. Hubbard's perception of enemies was broad and included not just psychiatry and mainstream medicine, but also the government, the media, and ex-members who criticized Scientology. Hubbard believed in the concept of fair game, a policy that suggests those deemed as enemy of Scientology could be combated or neutralized by any means necessary. While church officials canceled using the term fair game in the late 1960s, critics argue that the practice continues under different guises. Hubbard viewed government investigations and media scrutiny as an orchestrated attack against Scientology, often framing these challenges as a battle between the forces of good, Scientology, and the corrupt element of society aiming to suppress spiritual freedom. Ex-members who left the church and spoke out against its practices were labeled as suppressive persons, or SPs, and faced ostracization and various forms of harassment, according to reports from critics and defectors. We couldn't tell L. Ron Hubbard's story without examining the complexities of his 3 marriages and the relationship with his children. Intriguingly, despite his teachings, it appears Hubbard himself often strayed from the path he prescribed to others. In the world of Dianetics and Scientology, where beliefs meet the big stage, Hubbard's domestic life rivaled the drama of any reality TV show. His 3 tumultuous marriages and complex family dynamics might just shed light on the scrutable figure behind the church. His family tree, more like a sprawling epic saga, each branch weaving a complex narrative of personal drama and public spectacle. His first wife, Margaret Polly Grubb, who navigated the turbulent waters of L. Ron's early Pulp Fiction days, stood by her man through thick and thin, from pennies in the pocket to Dianetics on the shelves. Polly and Hubbard met in the early 1930s when Hubbard was just beginning his career as a writer. They married in 1933, a union marked by the ups and downs of Hubbard's early attempts to establish himself. Polly was a supportive wife during the early, often financially unstable years of Hubbard's early career during his Pulp Fiction and later science fiction days. The marriage was reportedly full of dramatic highs and lows that would characterize Hubbard's later relationship and life. The couple's financial struggles and Hubbard's burgeoning ambition as a writer and explorer placed a significant strain on their relationship. Despite these challenges, they initially seemed to work as a team, with Polly supporting Hubbard's career and taking care of their home and children. Polly and Hubbard went on to have 2 children, Lafayette Ronald Hubbard Jr., born in 1934, and Catherine May Hubbard, born in 1936. The marriage between Polly and Hubbard deteriorated over the years. By the mid-1940s, Hubbard was deeply involved in the occult practices of Jack Parson in the Ordo Templi Orientis, an occult secret society and hermetic magical organization in Pasadena, California. Their relationship ended in 1947 amidst Hubbard's deepening involvement with new religious movements and ideas that would eventually lead to the founding of Dianetics and Scientology. Polly's marriage to Hubbard set the stage for the complex interplay of personal relationship and ambitious endeavors that would mark Hubbard's life. After their divorce, Polly remained out of the public spotlight, focusing on raising their children away from the controversies of Scientology. Polly and Hubbard's oldest child, Lafayette Ronald Hubbard Jr., was born in 1934. He was also known as Nibs and later Ronald E. Wolfe. He was closely involved with Scientology from a young age, as his father developed Dianetics and later founded the Church of Scientology. Initially, he was a prominent member of the organization and held various positions within its structure. During the early years, Ronald worked alongside his father and was privy to the inner workings of Scientology. His role in the church gave him a unique perspective on its operations and the methodologies employed by his father, which would later become a point of contention and a source for his criticism. As Ronald grew older, his relationship with his father became strained. The breaking point came in the late 1970s when Ronald broke away from Scientology. In 1982, he changed his name to Ronald the Wolf, a symbolic gesture representing his desire to dissociate from his father's legacy in the Church of Scientology. This name change was part of a broader effort to start anew and reclaim his life outside the shadows of his father's influence. Ronald became one of the most vocal critics of L. Ron Hubbard's in Scientology. In November 1982, he took dramatic actions by filing a lawsuit in Riverside County, California, claiming that his father was either deceased or incapacitated and that malicious parties within the Church of Scientology were exploiting L. Ron Hubbard's estate. This lawsuit was an attempt to gain control of Hubbard's assets, asserting that church officials were misusing Hubbard's condition for their benefit. The case brought significant media attention and added to the controversy surrounding the church. In his affidavit and public interviews, DeWolf accused his father of fraud and mental manipulation and described Scientology as a degenerate cult. He detailed alleged dark practices within the organization, criticizing its foundation as being built on lies and deceit. The 1983 court case was a significant public spectacle. During the proceedings, representatives from L. Ron Hubbard provided evidence that Hubbard was still alive, including a written statement purportedly from Hubbard himself. The judge eventually ruled that there was insufficient evidence to declare Hubbard dead or incompetent. Although DeWolf's legal challenges failed, it further fueled the public discourse on the secretive nature of Scientology and Hubbard's personal life. Following the lawsuit, Ron DeWolf lived a relatively low-profile life, maintaining his stance against Scientology. He passed away in 1991. His legacy is complex. Some view him as a whistleblower who attempted to expose Scientology's alleged wrongdoings and dangers, and others as a disgruntled family member embittered by personal disputes. Ronald DeWolf's life is a testament to the deep division and personal conflicts that can arise in families entangled in controversial movements. His actions against his father in the Church of Scientology highlight the internal struggles of individuals caught between personal loyalties and moral opposition to practices they view as harmful. His story adds a poignant chapter to the history of Scientology and its founder, encapsulating themes of betrayal, familial duty, and the quest for personal redemption. Catherine May Hubbard lived a life far removed from the controversies surrounding Scientology and her family. She maintained a low profile throughout her life, and little public information about her personal or professional endeavors is available.
Sarah Northrop, Blond Bombshell and Damsel in Distress, married L. Ron Hubbard before the ink was dry on his divorce papers. Sarah's saga was filled with passion, accusations, and in the annals of true crime within religious cults, few stories are as dramatic and chilling as the allegations made by Sarah Northrop against L. Ron Hubbard. Fraught with claims of kidnapping, psychological abuse, and a desperate escape, not only paints a dark portrait of Hubbard, but also highlights the intense personal dramas that played out against the backdrop of his rising influence. Sarah, once a devoted follower of Hubbard, became romantically involved with him while he was still married to his first wife, Polly. Their relationship began within the context of their mutual involvement in the early development of Dianetics, a precursor to Scientology. They married in 1946, shortly after Hubbard's divorce from Polly was finalized. The union was immediately turbulent, marked by Hubbard's erratic behavior and grandiose ambitions. The most harrowing chapter of Sarah and Hubbard's marriage began with the birth of their daughter Alexis. By 1951, the marriage was disintegrating amidst mutual allegations of misconduct. In the middle of their divorce proceedings, Hubbard took a drastic step that would lead to one of the most serious accusations against him. According to Sarah, Hubbard abducted Alexis and fled to Havana, Cuba, effectively using their daughter as leverage in the increasingly acrimonious divorce. Sarah's public response was one of desperation and fear. She accused Hubbard of spiriting away their daughter to a foreign country beyond the reach of the U.S. law and claimed that Hubbard had done so to coerce her into subservience. Sarah described frantic efforts to track down Hubbard and Alexis, alleging that Hubbard used threats and psychological manipulation to keep her compliant and isolated from potential allies. The psychological aspect of Hubbard's control over Sarah was perhaps even more disturbing than the physical removal of Alexis. Sarah reported that Hubbard had systematically cut her off from her friends and family, an isolation tactic frequently used by manipulative partners. She described a pattern of psychological torture designed to break down her spirit and independence, which included threats against her life and the well-being of her daughter. This campaign of control and intimidation reached a peak when Sarah publicly denounced Hubbard, calling him hopelessly insane in a desperate plea for help and legal intervention. The legal and public fallout from these events was significant. The accusations against Hubbard were covered in the press, casting a shadow over his personal reputation and the newly established Church of Scientology. While Hubbard eventually returned to the United States with Alexis, the damage to his relationship with Sarah was irreparable. Their divorce was finalized soon after, with Sarah gaining custody of Alexis and Hubbard disclaiming paternity, alleging that Sarah had been unfaithful. Due to the nature of her early life and the controversies surrounding her father, Alexis Hubbard largely disappeared from the public eye after these events. There is limited information available about her life following her parents' separation, as she and her mother sought to distance themselves from L. Ron Hubbard and the Church of Scientology. Overall, Alexis Hubbard's story is often overshadowed by the larger narrative of her father's life and the development of Scientology, but her early years remain a poignant chapter in the troubled history of the Hubbard family. This disturbing incident offers a glimpse into the complex and often hidden dynamics of L. Ron Hubbard's personal life, highlighting a pattern of behavior that stands in stark contrast to the ethical and moral principles he espoused in his professional work. For followers of true crime and observers of cult dynamics, the story of Sarah Northrup and L. Ron Hubbard provides a chilling example of how power, control, and manipulation can manifest behind closed doors, leaving lasting scars on those caught in their wake. The Sarah Northrup incident remains a critical episode for understanding the darker sides of L. Ron Hubbard's character and the early days of Scientology, reflecting themes of control and abuse that recur in discussions about the organization to this day.
Hubbard's third and longest marriage was to Mary Sue Whipp. They met in 1952 and quickly married that same year. Together they had 4 children, including Diana Meredith Hubbard, Quentin Hubbard, Suzette Hubbard, and Arthur Conan Hubbard. Mary Sue held various high-ranking positions within the Church of Scientology. She was instrumental in establishing the Guardian's Office, the intelligence gathering and legal affairs branch of the Church, which protects the organization and manages its complex legal matters. As the head of the Guardian's Office, she was deeply involved in some of the Church's most controversial activities, including the infamous Operation Snow White. Operation Snow White, carried out in the 1970s, was one of the biggest infiltration of the United States government in history. Her involvement in this covert operation ultimately led her to imprisonment, marking a significant chapter in the controversial history of Scientology. In the 1970s, Scientology was under scrutiny by various governments and agencies worldwide. L. Ron Hubbard, the enigmatic leader of Scientology, believed that this scrutiny was part of a larger conspiracy against the organization. In response, he initiated Operation Snow White under the direction of the Guardian's Office, which Mary Sue Hubbard led as the controller. The operation's primary goal was to purge unfavorable records about Scientology and its founder from government files. The scope of this mission was enormous, targeting agencies in more than 30 countries, but it was most notably aggressive in the United States. As the controller of the Guardian's Office, she oversaw a network of Scientology operatives who were tasked with infiltrating the government offices, including the IRS, the Department of Justice, and the FBI. These operatives were instructed to steal or destroy documents and even planned wiretaps to gather intelligence beneficial to Scientology. Under Mary Sue's guidance, the operation became the largest infiltration of the United States government, with operatives holding positions within various federal agencies. They used forged credentials and covert methods to access sensitive areas and files. The covert operation continued successfully until 1977, when the FBI, acting on a tip-off, conducted simultaneous raids on Scientology offices in Los Angeles and D.C. The evidence uncovered was overwhelming, leading to the indictment of Mary Sue Hubbard and 10 other high-ranking Scientology officials. The trial that followed exposed the full extent of Operation Snow White. Despite attempts to distance herself from illegal activities, Mary Sue Hubbard was found to have been intricately involved in the orchestration of the operation. In 1979, she and her co-defendants were convicted of conspiracy against the United States government. Mary Sue Hubbard was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but served only a year before being released on parole. The fallout from Operation Snow White was severe for Scientology, with its reputation deeply tarnished by the revelations of illegal activities conducted at the highest levels of the organization. The imprisonment of Mary Sue Hubbard marked a critical point in Scientology's history, serving as a stark reminder of the lengths to which the organization will go to protect and promote its interest. This episode remains a significant study in the intersection of religion, law, and covert operations, continuing to resonate in discussions about the boundaries of religious freedom and the state's role in monitoring religious organizations. Mary Sue's legacy within Scientology is complex. She was a key figure in the church's early development and expansion, dedicated to her husband and the organization he created. However, her involvement in Operation Snow White and subsequent legal issues marred her reputation and underscored some of the darker aspects of the Church of Scientology's history. Mary Sue's life reflects the intertwined narratives of devotion, power, and controversy that characterize much of Scientology's history.
The final chapter of L. Ron Hubbard's life is shrouded in mystery and marked by increasing reclusiveness. After a series of legal and public relations challenges faced by Scientology in the late 70s and 80s, Hubbard lived in seclusion, moving among various hiding places to avoid legal authorities and public scrutiny. Hubbard spent his final years in a luxurious motorhome or secluded ranches in California with only a handful of trusted aides who knew his whereabouts. His reclusiveness in his last years was in stark contrast to the public persona he had maintained as a charismatic leader in Scientology. He continued writing and managing Scientology's affairs through dispatches, but his direct involvement with the organization and its members diminished significantly. On January 24, 1986, Hubbard died at his ranch in Creston, California. The official cause of death was reported as a cerebral vascular accident, commonly known as a stroke. The conclusion was based on the death certificate filed in San Luis Obispo County, California. However, the circumstances surrounding his passing and the immediate actions taken posthumously by the Church of Scientology have fueled skepticism and controversy. One of the primary reasons for skepticism was the lack of independent verification of Hubbard's cause of death at the time of his passing. Hubbard had been living in seclusion, with very few individuals aware his exact whereabouts, or the state of his health. The Church of Scientology controlled the narrative surrounding Hubbard's death with limited external or third-party oversight. This control extended to the handling of Hubbard's body, which was cremated shortly after his death was pronounced, further limiting the possibility of an independent autopsy or examination. The decision to immediately cremate Hubbard's body before an independent verification of the cause of death could be conducted raised questions. Hubbard's final years led to the speculation about the actual circumstances of his death. Critics and observers outside the church wondered if the swift cremation was aimed at avoiding potential legal or public scrutiny. The Church of Scientology's explanation for Hubbard's departure from his physical body further added to the intrigue. According to the church, Hubbard had achieved a level of spiritual advancement that rendered his physical body unnecessary. The church stated that Hubbard had consciously chosen to drop his body to continue the research and spiritual exploration in a non-physical form. This explanation aligns with Scientology's belief regarding the Thetan, the spiritual being, and its external nature independent of the physical body. However, this narrative was met with skepticism by those outside the church, particularly given the lack of tangible evidence to support such claims. How the Church of Scientology handled and communicated Hubbard's death has had a lasting impact on his legacy and the perception of Scientology. The lack of transparency, combined with the Church's spiritual explanation for Hubbard's death, has fueled ongoing questions and skepticism among critics, former members, and observers of the movement. These circumstances have contributed to a broader debate about the practices, beliefs, and governance of the Church of Scientology, reflecting the complex relationship between the organization's internal narratives and external scrutiny. The controversy surrounding Hubbard's death, stemming from the lack of independent verification, the immediate cremation of his body, and the Church's spiritual explanation, underscore the enduring mysteries and debates that have come to characterize much of Scientology's history and its founder's legacy. Disputes over the authenticity of Hubbard's last will led to legal battles over his estate. Critics and former members raised questions about the management of Hubbard's assets and the legitimacy of the leadership transition within the Church of Scientology. The legal battles over Hubbard's estate involved disputes between the Church of Scientology and several of Hubbard's estranged family members who challenged the will and claimed the right to part of his estate. Upon his death, a new will was presented dated just a day before his passing. This will significantly altered the disposition of his estate from the previous versions, leaving the bulk of his assets to the Church of Scientology, specifically to a trust dedicated to the furtherance of Scientology. His estranged family members contested the will's validity, arguing that Hubbard was not of sound mind at the time of the drafting, or that he may have been under undue influence. The lawsuit claiming that Hubbard was either deceased or incapacitated was part of a broader estrangement between Hubbard and several family members who had become disenchanted with Scientology and distanced themselves from Hubbard and the organization. Hubbard's will revealed various aspects of his final years, including his reclusive lifestyle and the secrecy surrounding his activities and health status. The court proceedings involved testimony regarding Hubbard's competence, the circumstances under which his will was executed, and the nature of his relationship with the family members contesting the will. The Church of Scientology prevailed the legal battles, with the courts upholding the validity of Hubbard's last will. The outcome ensured that the vast majority of Hubbard's estate, including copyrights to his published works and the substantial financial assets he had accumulated, remained under the control of the Church of Scientology. This included the rights to Dianetics and the Scientology materials, which are crucial to the organization's ongoing operations and financial stability. According to Hubbard's original formulations, this control has allowed the Church to continue promoting Dianetics and Scientology's teachings to maintain a consistent doctrine and practice among its members. L. Ron Hubbard's final days and the legacy he left behind continue to influence Scientology and its place in the modern religious landscape. Thank you for joining us as we've explored the peaks and the valleys of L. Ron Hubbard's life, from his adventurous claims and literary contributions to establishing a new religious movement. His impact on the world is indelible. Whether viewed as a visionary or a controversial figure, Hubbard's story challenges us to consider the power of belief and the lengths one may go to achieve spiritual enlightenment or personal legacy. As we conclude this episode, we're reminded of the complexity of human nature and the diverse path one can take in pursuit of truth, success, and recognition. Whether you're a skeptic, a believer, or simply a curious soul, this episode has provided food for thought and a deeper insight into one of the most controversial figures of the 20th century.
In the next episode of Sins of Scientology, we focus on David Miscavige, his dramatic rise to power in the pivotal moments that have defined his controversial leadership. From whispered allegations to open confrontations, we'll discover the complexities of a man who holds the reins of one of the most secretive organizations in the world. In future episodes, we'll also venture deeper into the shadowy corners of Scientology. Allegations of child trafficking, bizarre rituals, and severe abuse within the organization will be scrutinized, shedding light onto the darker practices that lurk behind his facade. Furthermore, we will unravel the astonishing story of how Scientology orchestrated the takeover of a town, cleverly and quietly pulling the strings to seize control right under the noses of his unsuspected residents. Stay with us as we continue to expose these stories and more, offering a critical look at one of the most controversial religious movements of our time. Make sure to subscribe and join us on the next episode as we continue to expose the sins of Scientology. Until then, keep questioning, keep seeking, and may your journey be as rich and enlightening as the stories you encounter.